You put one finger on a small plastic lever and the room changes. That is the entire arrangement. There is no waiting, no confirmation, no sense of anything having been spent. The lamp is on because you decided it should be, and the decision and the result occupy the same instant. Electricity is the only utility that behaves this way, and it has trained us accordingly. Water has a moment of delay and a sound. Gas has a smell and a flame you can see. Heat arrives slowly enough that you notice it arriving. Electricity has no interval at all, which is why it stopped feeling like a service somewhere in the last century and started feeling like a property of rooms. The way a floor is solid, the way air is breathable. Nobody thanks a floor. It gets quiet. Not silent. Quiet in a specific, unfamiliar way. Because a modern house has a permanent low sound made of refrigerator compressor, furnace blower, air handler, transformer hum, and half a dozen fans you have never consciously heard. All of it stops at once. What people describe afterward is almost never the darkness. It is the sound of the house having stopped being modern. And then the arithmetic starts. In kitchens all over the neighborhood at the same moment. And it is remarkably consistent from house to house. How much phone battery? How cold is it going to get? Or how hot? Does the sump pump have anything behind it? Does the well have pressure left in the tank? Is the gas station down the road able to pump? Does the neighbor with the oxygen concentration? Darkness is the part you can see, which is why we named the event after it. The actual event is a building losing its functions in a particular order. Start with water, because water is the one that surprises people. If the house is on a private well, the pump is electric and the tank holds a few minutes of pressure, so the taps go dry almost immediately. No shower, no toilet, no dishes. If the house is on a municipal system, the water usually keeps running for a while, because the pressure is in a tower and the tower is uphill. But the tower is refilled by pumps, and the pumps run on the same grid. And if the outage is regional and long, a boil water advisory eventually follows the power outage the way thunder follows lightning. Then heating and cooling, which in a modern American house are electric. Then the sump pump, which is the only thing standing between a finished basement and 8 inches of water, and which fails precisely during the storms that fill it. Then the smaller things, which turn out not to be small. The garage door, which has a manual release most homeowners discover for the first time in the dark. The elevator, which decides whether an 80-year-old on the 11th floor can leave the building at all. The medication that needed refrigeration. The CPAP machine. The insulin. The card reader at the store that is still open, which cannot take a card, which means the outage is now a cash economy for people who stopped carrying cash a decade ago. The cell tower, which has a battery good for a few. Modern life did not simply add electric devices to a house that already worked. It rebuilt the house around the assumption that electricity is continuous, and then removed the older arrangements. The well handle, the fireplace, the cash drawer, the landline that drew its own power from the phone company's batteries, because keeping them was pointless. Every convenience added over the last 80 years raised the cost of losing electricity. The grid did not just become more important, it became load-bearing for things that have nothing to do with electricity. What is the longest you have ever gone without power? And what was Since 2013, when the Energy Information Administration began collecting reliability data, the average American electricity customer has lost power for roughly 2 hours a year. Total, cumulative, across the entire year, once major events are excluded. That figure has been strikingly stable. Not 2 hours in a good year and 9 in a bad one. About 2 hours, year after year, decade in. The ordinary American grid, on ordinary days, is a quietly excellent machine, and it has not been getting worse. Now put the major events back in. The same measure jumps to somewhere between 3.5 and 8 hours. and it lurches unpredictably from year to year, depending entirely on what the weather did. Hurricane Helene, in September, left 5.9 million customers dark across 10 states, with at least 1.2 million of them in South Carolina, and the average South Carolina customer spent nearly 53 hours without electricity that year. 53 hours, in a state where the underlying everyday system is as reliable as anywhere else. Sit with the shape of that. The baseline is flat. The tail is what moves. Which means, the American grid is not one problem, it is two, and they have different names that people use interchangeably and should not. Reliability is how well the system handles a normal Tuesday, a squirrel, a car into a pole, a failed insulator, and by that measure, the country is doing fine. Resilience is how well it absorbs. So the question this whole subject actually turns on is not why the grid broke. Physical systems break. A hurricane can move the ocean onto land, and no arrangement of wood and aluminum survives that. The real question is what happens in the 4 days afterward, how fast the damage is found, how many people can be brought in, whether the parts exist, and in what order the pieces come back. That is a different machine from the one that delivers your 2 flat hours of outage a year, and it only exists during emergencies. To understand why restoration works the way it does, you have to know what is behind the lever, and it is not a power plant. It is a chain, and every link is a different piece of engineering. Electricity is generated somewhere. Gas, nuclear, hydro, wind, solar, coal. That is what the giant steel lattice towers are. Bulk transport, region to region. Near a town, a substation drops the voltage and splits the flow into distribution feeders. Those feeders run down the roads on wooden poles, branching as they go. Near your house, one more transformer, the gray can on the pole or the green box on the lawn, drops the voltage again to something a building can use. Then a service drop to the wall, a meter, a panel, a breaker, a wire in the ceiling, and the lever under your finger. The light comes on only if the entire chain is continuous, which means a storm does not have to defeat the power system. It only has to interrupt it at one point between you and the source, and everything upstream of that point can be in perfect condition, generating power that has. It looks like favoritism, or incompetence, or proof that somebody forgot your address. It is almost always geometry. Electricity does not spread through a neighborhood like water finding a level. It travels along specific circuits, and the two sides of one street are frequently fed by different feeders coming from different directions. Your neighbor is not luckier. Your neighbor is on a different branch of a different tree, and the tree that fell on yours. The overwhelming majority of weather outages that ordinary Americans experience do not happen at power plants or on transmission towers. They happen on the distribution system, the local poles and wires. And the reason is distribution runs down residential streets, past millions of oak limbs, beside driveways and creeks and construction sites, and the exact places where weather turns into debris. It is exposed by definition because its whole job is to reach every building. So wind is rarely the actual enemy. Wind is the delivery mechanism. The wind brings the tree takes the conductor. The rain saturates the soil so the next tree comes out by the roots. The flooding closes the road. The closed road delays the crew. The delayed fuel truck slows the generators at the hospital. A storm does not attack separate systems. It attacks the joints between them, and the outage becomes a network of other outages. And different storms break the grid in genuinely different ways, which is why restoration times vary so wildly. After Helene came ashore and then went somewhere nobody expected, into the southern Appalachians, the problem in some counties was not that the poles were down, it was that the roads were gone. Landslides and flooding removed the roots a bucket truck would need, and you cannot drive a 40,000-pound vehicle to a broken pole across a road that no longer exists. In that terrain, access becomes the largest part of the repair. Hiking equipment in, building temporary road, waiting for a transportation department to cut a path first. An ice storm is the opposite personality, and in some ways worse. Freezing rain adds weight to every exposed surface at once. Every wire, every branch, every square foot of tree. The roads are slick, the buckets are cold, the hydraulics are stiff. And the damage total is still growing while restoration is already underway. A derecho is a wall of straight-line wind that can flatten a corridor hundreds of miles long in an afternoon, turning an ordinary summer Tuesday into a multi-state emergency with no warning worth the name. A tornado erases a narrow strip completely, which is easier to find and harder to rebuild. Here is the part of American infrastructure that genuinely has no equivalent anywhere else in the economy, and almost no one outside the industry can name it. It is called mutual assistance, and the arrangement is this. When a utility, not contractors for hire, their own crews, their own trucks, their own supervisors, driving or flying across the country to work in somebody else's territory under somebody else's supervision. The companies compete commercially. During a restoration, they behave as a single labor pool, and the whole thing runs on reciprocity rather than contract. The utility sending 400 people to Georgia this October is the utility that got 4,500 people from as far away as New Mexico and Quebec when its own turn came. The scale is difficult to believe until you see the numbers. For Hurricane Helene, the Edison Electric Institute reported that nearly 50,000 Pacific Gas and Electric flew more than 400 workers from California to Georgia and shipped more than 300 of its trucks across the continent to meet them. Appalachian Power's Helene restoration alone drew a force of more than 7,300 people from 27 states, and in that one effort, they replaced 1,455 poles, 214 miles of wire, and 438 transformers. And it scales down as well as up, which is the part that matters most in rural America. A small municipal utility or a member-owned cooperative may employ a line crew of 3 or 4 people. That crew cannot rebuild a system. But through the mutual aid network, that same utility can have 30 or 50 line workers on its property. A temporary organization of tens of thousands of people assembles around a disaster, functions for 2 or 3 weeks, and then completely dissolves. It has no permanent headquarters and no standing budget. It exists only when something has gone badly wrong. But you cannot simply tell thousands of workers to drive toward a hurricane. The moment a restoration force exceeds a few hundred people, the hard problem stops being electrical and becomes logistical. Those crews need assignments and maps of a system they have never seen. They need fuel in a region where the gas stations cannot pump because they have no power. They need food 3 times a day, water in quantity, somewhere to sleep, and somewhere to wash clothes that have been in mud and rain for 14 hours. They need materials staged close enough to reach, poles, crossarms. They need a safety briefing every morning and a local guide who knows which back road floods. So the utility stands up a temporary base, a fairground, a speedway, a large field beside an interstate, and for 2 weeks it holds mobile kitchens, fuel bowsers, material yards, laundry trailers, and hundreds of trucks lined up in the dark before dawn. To a passing driver, this looks like a lot of parked vehicles and a certain amount of standing around, and it is one of the most common sources of public fury during an outage. Crews sitting still while a neighborhood sits dark. Almost always what is happening is assignment, refueling, materials distribution, or a weather hold. But that explanation does not travel well from a staging area to a front porch, and the utility usually does. A bucket 60 feet in the air becomes a sail. Trees are still coming down. Conductors may be energized from an unexpected direction. Lightning may still be active. So crews are deliberately staged outside the forecast damage zone, close enough to move in fast, far enough not to be trapped and destroyed themselves. From inside a dark house, This looks exactly like nobody caring. From inside the system, it is the only version of the plan that does not begin by producing more casualties. When the wind finally drops, the crews do not go fix things. They go look at things. And this is the phase the public finds hard. So the first wave is assessment. Crews driving every circuit from the substation outward, walking where roads are blocked, flying transmission lines by helicopter, putting drones over terrain that cannot be reached, taking boats through flooded sections. They are producing a list. This pole snapped. This crossarm is broken. This transformer is destroyed. This span of conductor is on the ground. This road will not take a heavy truck. This substation has water in it. The reason this cannot be skipped is the single most counterintuitive fact about power restoration. A customer sees one tree on one line and reasonably concludes the repair is obvious. Remove tree, restore power. But that circuit may have 20 more failures further down it. If a crew clears the visible tree and energizes the line, worse, energizing a line with unknown damage on it puts current into conductors that may be lying in someone's backyard. So the truck that pulled up outside your house, sat for 10 minutes, and drove away without doing anything, almost certainly did do something. It wrote your damage down. This is genuinely infuriating to watch, and it is the thing that makes the next 4 days possible, because until the whole picture exists, nobody can decide what to fix first, and the order is where restoration is actually won or lost. Utilities restore power in a sequence that seems, from a dark house, obviously wrong. Transmission first, then substations, then the largest distribution feeders, then critical facilities, then smaller branches. If a substation is out, every circuit hanging off it has no source. You can repair a neighborhood transformer perfectly, and it will deliver nothing, because there is nothing upstream to deliver. And if one repair on a main feeder returns 10,000 customers, while one repair on a service line returns a single house, then doing the feeder first is not favoritism. It is the only sequence that gets the most people back the fastest. Hospitals, water and wastewater plants, emergency dispatch centers, and shelters get priority for the same structural reason. Their failure produces further failures across the whole community. But the order is a plan, and a storm is a collection of exceptions to plans. A hospital may be on the priority list, and the plan produces outcomes that feel arbitrary at street level. Two customers who lost power in the same second can be restored 4 days apart, because one was behind a single broken crossarm on a suburban feeder, and the other is at the end of a rural line with 20 poles down, 3 trees across the right-of-way, and a washed-out access road. There is also a category of dark house that the utility cannot help at all, and this one produces some of the bitterest phone calls. If the storm tore the service mast off the roof, or water got into the main panel, the building itself is no longer capable of receiving electricity safely. The utility can rebuild the entire line to the property, and the lights still will not come on. Because what stands between that family and the grid is now a licensed In the field, it is a different problem belonging to a different profession. Power restored sounds like an action, a switch thrown, a lever pulled. In the field, it is dozens of separate jobs, and one of them is worth walking through slowly, because it explains why the timeline is what it is. Consider a single broken pole. To the public, it is a piece of wood leaning across a road. To the crew, it is a structure under load. Conductors pull on it in several directions at once. There may be a transformer bolted to it, a streetlight, a communications line belonging to another company entirely, a switch, a fuse cutout. Before anyone touches anything, the line has to be de-energized, tested to confirm it is actually dead, and grounded on both sides. Because a line believed to be dead is the specific thing that kills line workers. Then, clear the tree, which is often a separate crew with its own hazards. Set the truck on ground that will hold it. Drill a new hole with a digger derrick. Remove or cut away the old pole. Stand the new one, plumb it, backfill and compact. Install the crossarm, the insulators, the hardware, the transformer if there was one. Transfer or restring the conductors and pull them to the right tension. Too loose and they swing into each other. Inspect. Remove the grounds. Then and only then, close the circuit and confirm that customers are actually receiving power rather than that the line is merely energized. One pole can absorb the better part of a working day. A serious hurricane breaks thousands. Appalachian Power replaced 1,455 of them after a single storm, and Appalachian Power was one utility in one part of one event. When people ask why it is taking so long, this is the honest answer. It is being rebuilt, by hand, one structure at a time, by people standing in the mud where it fell. And here is the constraint that has quietly become the most important one, and that did not exist. The grid is not only wires and current. It is also inventory. Poles stacked in yards, reels of conductor, boxes of connectors, and above all, transformers, which are heavy, specific, not interchangeable between applications, and made of materials that come from a very small number of places. And the supply of them has come apart. Distribution transformers that took 8 to 12 weeks to order before the pandemic stretched past 100 weeks at the peak in 2023, and in 2026 still run somewhere in the range of 30 to 50 weeks, depending on specification. Large power transformers, the substation scale units, average something like 128 weeks, about 2.5 years, and some specialized orders. The core material, grain-oriented electrical steel, is produced by a handful of mills worldwide, and retooling a mill to make it takes years. Meanwhile, demand has exploded from every direction at once. Data centers, electrification of heating and vehicles, solar interconnections, and utilities hardening their systems after exactly the kind of storms this story is about. Utilities that used to order 2,000 distribution transformers a year now order 4,000 or 5,000, which produces a strange and slightly uncomfortable conclusion. How fast your lights come back on after a hurricane is partly determined by procurement decisions made 2 years earlier, by a supply manager you will never hear of, buying equipment for a storm that had not happened yet, against a budget that had to be. Watch a line crew for 20 minutes, and you may conclude they are moving slowly. They are. That is the job. Electrical power line installation and repair sits consistently in the Bureau of Labor Statistics list of the 10 most dangerous occupations in the country. In recent years, the fatality rate has run somewhere around 20 deaths per 100,000 workers. The exact figure moves year to year, which is roughly 5 times the average across all American occupations. Electrocution and falls account for most of it, and storm work adds every hazard that ordinary line work does not have. Unstable trees that come down hours after the wind stops, ground that has been undercut by water, poles holding tension in directions nobody can see, traffic moving around a work zone at night, heat building inside protective clothing. A downed conductor does not spark, hiss, or arc to announce itself. It can lie in wet grass, making no sound at all, and kill anyone who touches it or the fence it is resting on. A line that everyone believes is de-energized can become live from another direction, and increasingly from an unexpected one. A home generator wired into the house without a proper transfer switch can push power backward through the service drop, through the neighborhood transformer, and out onto the distribution line as several thousand volts. Rooftop solar and home batteries introduce their own version of the same question. This is why every step has a procedure attached. Isolate the section. Test it. Ground it on both sides of the work. Follow a written switching order with the control room. Confirm verbally, twice. Caution here is not the opposite of speed. It is the version of speed that does not end with a crew standing in a hospital parking lot at 4 in the morning. Which brings us to the object most Americans buy specifically so they will not have to think about any of this, and which turns out to be one of the deadliest things in the entire storm. A portable generator is a small internal combustion engine running in a residential setting for hours or days, and it produces carbon monoxide in quantities that are difficult to intuit. The Consumer Product Safety Commission estimates that about 85 people a year in the United States die of carbon monoxide poisoning from portable generators, and those deaths cluster with grim reliability in the days immediately after major storms. Carbon monoxide has no color and no smell. The Commission's data also shows the burden falling unevenly. African Americans have accounted for roughly 23% of generator-related carbon monoxide deaths, against about 12% of the population. And the reason it keeps happening is not carelessness so much as a specific, widely held, entirely wrong belief. In consumer surveys, a majority of respondents, around 62% in one large survey, said they thought it was safe to run a generator inside a garage as long as the garage door was open. It is not. Opening a door does not provide anywhere near enough ventilation, and a porch, a carport, a crawl space, or a shed is not far enough away either. The guidance, a generator connected directly into a home's wiring without a transfer switch, does not only power the house, it energizes the service drop and sends electricity backward into the neighborhood, onto lines that a crew has tested, grounded, and declared safe. The machine bought to make one family independent of the system can kill the person restoring the system, which is the honest shape of the whole thing. The household never actually disconnected from the grid. It just stopped being able to see the connection. During any large outage, one number does all the public work. Customers without power. 200,000. 1 million. 5.9 million. It can be a household of 1, a household of 6, an apartment building with 90 units behind a single meter, a school, a factory, a grocery store, or a hospital campus. So the figure is neither the number of people affected nor the number of buildings. It is a count of connections, useful for comparing the scale of storms and nearly useless for understanding what is happening to anyone. When a utility announces that 90% of customers are restored, it is making a true statement about its network and saying nothing whatsoever about the 10% who are now living in the hardest damage and hearing that the emergency is basically over. Because losing power is not one experience. In one house, it is a novelty, candles, a card game, an unusual amount of family conversation, a story afterward. In an apartment tower, an elderly resident on the 11th floor cannot get down the stairs and will not be able to for 4 days. On the same block, one household has an automatic standby generator that started itself before anyone noticed the outage. One has solar with a battery. One has a portable unit and 12 gallons of stored gasoline. One has a flashlight and a car charger. And one has none of it, and no money to buy any of it, and nowhere else to go. Resilience, at the household level, is mostly purchased. That is not an accusation of anyone, it is a description. And it means the same storm, on the same street, produces a mild inconvenience at one address and a medical emergency 4 doors down, while the map shows one uniform field of red dots, and the news reports a single number that flattens all of it into a quantity. One substation energized brings back tens of thousands. One feeder repair returns 10,000 more. Percentages climb fast enough to put on a graphic, and within 2 or 3 days, a utility can honestly say that 80 or 90% of its customers have service. Then the curve bends and lies almost flat, because everything remaining is the hardest work in the smallest increments. Individual spans down behind houses, single transformers, rural laterals, sections that need whole poles, properties that need an electrician first. At the start, 1 crew hour restores thousands of people. At the end, 1 crew hour restores 3. And this is where rural America takes the worst of it, for reasons that have nothing to do with anyone's priorities. In a dense town, a mile of the same fallen tree, the same broken pole, the same hours of work, restoring 100th as many people. A rural outage lasts longer not because rural customers count for less, but because the physical system contains far more distance per person, and distance is what a storm damages. There is a Washington, D.C. study of undergrounding from years ago that captures this shape almost perfectly. It found that about $1 billion of investment would meaningfully improve reliability for 65% of the utility's customers, and that reaching the remaining 35% in the outlying areas would cost roughly another $4.7 billion, nearly 5 times the money for half as many people. That ratio is the tail of the curve expressed in dollars, and it is the reason the last house they feel forgotten, and from where they are standing, that is a reasonable thing to feel. Every major outage produces the same public response within about 48 hours, and it is a completely sensible one. Put the lines underground. Trees cannot fall on what is buried. Why has nobody thought of this? They have, continuously, for 60 years. And the reason it has not happened everywhere is the price, which is larger than most people imagine. Converting existing overhead distribution to underground generally runs several times the cost of the overhead line. In California, utilities have reported figures from roughly $1.5 to over $6 million per mile, depending on regulators there calculated that undergrounding all of the state's roughly 147,000 miles of overhead distribution would cost on the order of $550 billion, with the transmission system another $200 billion on top. North Carolina studied doing it statewide and concluded it would take about 25 years and raise electricity prices by something like 125%. The state declined. And undergrounding is not a pure win even where it is affordable, which is the part that rarely makes it into the conversation. Buried lines fail less often, and when they do fail, they take considerably longer to fix, because a fault 40 inches down does not announce its location. Crews have to, so a community that undergrounds trades many short outages for fewer, longer ones, which is a genuinely better deal in most places and is still a trade rather than a solution. The honest version is that this is a real choice with a real price, and communities keep making it, usually by declining, sometimes in targeted stretches, occasionally at scale in high-risk corridors. What makes it hard is not that anyone is being stupid. It is that the cost arrives immediately and visibly on every monthly bill, and the benefit arrives invisibly, years later, as storms that were less bad than they would have been. Almost nobody experiences a disaster that did not happen. There is a version of this story where the heroism is the point. The convoys, the 16-hour... A distribution system survives a hurricane largely on decisions made in fair weather, by people nobody was watching. Somebody trimmed the vegetation along that right-of-way 18 months ago, and the limb that would have taken the line down was already gone. Somebody replaced a cracked insulator during a routine inspection in March. Somebody specified a Class 2 pole where a Class 4 would have satisfied the code and cost less. Somebody argued for elevating a substation above the new flood maps and won, or argued and lost. Somebody kept a relay calibration schedule. Somebody ordered spare transformers that sat in a yard for 2 years, looking like tied-up capital. Somebody ran an emergency exercise that everyone hoped would remain hypothetical. And the awkward political fact underneath all of this is that the work of preventing disasters competes for money against everything else a utility must justify, in front of regulators, in a year when nothing is failing, and the public that will be furious about a 4-day outage in October is the same public that would rather not see a rate increase in March. Everybody wants resilience. Very few people enjoy watching it get built, and fewer enjoy paying for it in advance. Which is why the aftermath follows such a predictable rhythm. During the outage, a flooded substation is a scandal. 6 months later, it is a capital project with a completion date in 3 years. A community demands buried lines in the week, so picture the end of it, 4 or 5 days out, on a residential street where the emergency is over for almost everyone. The debris has been dragged to the curb in piles. The grocery store reopened yesterday. The traffic lights are working. The news trucks have left. The outage map shows the county at 97%, and the number has stopped being a story. But 11 houses on this street are still dark, because a tree took the span behind the back fences and the transformer with it. And this was never going to be first. It is early evening when the truck finally turns onto the street. Cones go out. A chainsaw starts and stops. A bucket rises into a tree, and work lights turn the canopy white against a sky. A woman watches through a window with a flashlight in her hand and does not go outside because she has been awake since 5 and does not want to interrupt them. Then the grounds come off and a switch closes somewhere she cannot see, and the whole street comes back at once. The porch light, the refrigerator, starting with that low mechanical shutter, the router, the microwave flashing 12 o'clock, the furnace fan. The house makes its sound again, the sound she had never once noticed until it stopped, and within about 90 seconds, she will stop noticing it for another several years. That is not ingratitude. That is the entire design goal. The grid exists in order to be forgotten, and being forgotten is the only proof that it worked. But nothing about it was an assessment that mapped the damage before anyone was allowed to fix it. A sequence that returned the substations, then the feeders, then the branches, then this street. 1,400 poles. A transformer that had been sitting in a warehouse since before anyone knew there would be a storm. And a crew standing in the mud at 7 in the evening on day 5, doing the smallest and least visible version of the work for 11 houses. The world works because someone keeps it working. And when the lamp comes back on, it will feel like nothing happened at all. One finger, one small plastic lever, a room that changes. That is the whole illusion, rebuilt by hand, pole by pole, and handed back to you as if it had never been interrupted. Still running.